Hey everybody, welcome back to Hints and Guesses, my podcast. I'm pretty excited today to bring you a conversation with Rebecca Wildbear. She's a guide at Animas Valley Institute. She's a yoga teacher, and she's just written a new book called Wild Yoga. The subtitle is A Practice of Initiation, Veneration, and Advocacy for the Earth. I think you'll find our conversation pretty interesting, and it's a book that's much more than a book about yoga as we kind of commonly understand that word. So I hope you'll enjoy it. Just a couple things from my end as we get started here. I just got back from Israel, which was a fantastic trip. I brought my youngest daughter along, and most of the group was from Minneapolis, from a church in Minneapolis, and just feel really grateful to have another opportunity to lead this kind of experience, which I call pilgrimage. And and I'm already looking ahead. I don't have any more in 2023, but I hope to have at least one, possibly two, the following year. So be on the lookout for that. The way these groups often get started is there's sort of a core group that's interested and contacts me, but most of the time I open it up to other individuals. So if that's something that intrigues you and you are longing for that kind of experience or have some curiosity around that, I don't have anything posted on my website now, but you can send me an email and I can at least get you on the list, and that way you can stay informed. I have two upcoming things. I better get my calendar. At the end of the month, the end of March, I have a program here at the Dominican Center in Grand Rapids. So this is March 24 and 25. This is a Friday night and a Saturday. I'm doing a program that I'm calling Dream Work and the Soul. It's for those who are interested in dream work. And originally I had in mind it would be a program for spiritual directors who are interested in how to listen to dreams, and therapists or other people sort of in the helping field. But it's more than that. You can just come if you're interested in dreams, or you have some curiosity around them. Or maybe you even have a dream journal and you're wondering, hey, how do I even begin to have a relationship with dreams? What are they? And that sort of thing. So 2-day little workshop. I'm really looking forward to it. I love working with dreams. It's a big part of what I do in one-on-one guiding. It's a big part of my training at Animas Valley Institute. And also, I work with dreams on my sort of wilderness programs. Not sort of, they are wilderness programs. So anyway, March 24 and 25, it's not online. This is an in-person kind of thing, because a few people sent me a message and asked me about that. And the other thing that's coming is I'm going to do a retreat here in Michigan at the end of June. And once again, I got to look at my calendar to make sure I give you the right dates. It's on my website. I'm just now putting it together, but June 21 to 25. So it'll start on a Wednesday night, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and we'll return on Sunday. That's the plan. I do them about an hour north of Grand Rapids at a fantastic place, a kind of retreat center, artist center that backs up to some federal land, and he himself has 20 acres, this guy named Rob, and really an amazing place to host a retreat or a program. It's called Wilderness Within. I believe that my intention so far is to include a one-day solo fast. I did the same exact or a similar program last year about this same time. So it includes, practices, conversation, some shaping and guiding of the experience on the front end and after the solo. But right in the center will be a 24-hour sort of in a fasted state kind of experience. So if that calls to you in some way, this is a great way to do it. If you've never fasted, particularly outside in wild places, it's an amazing experience. It can take a couple different shapes and forms, but if that, has been on your radar for a while and you want to a way in, this is, I think, a great on-ramp. So you'll probably want to sign up for that early, because I don't like these groups to get too big. So again, that's on my website, kentdobson.com. So anyway, sorry for the long advertisement here at the beginning. Maybe just one more. I just had last night my first kind of patron only Zoom. So if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know it's supported by my patrons on patreon.com that make this thing happen, and support on all kinds of different levels, from $1 on up. And I'm really, really grateful to this diverse community, which is actually all over the place, all over the world at this point. And I don't know, I'm humbled by that, but I also wanted to, I wanted there to be a kind of conversation happening with the patrons. So we had a group Zoom, and it was amazing. So I'm going to do another one. So if you're a patron and you missed the last Zoom conversation, look for an email. It'll come through the Patreon email. It'll come to your inbox, but it'll be through the Patreon site, and for another link to the next Zoom group. Would love to see you there. And if you're not a patron and you want to be, well, not only do you help support the podcast, but you get to be a part of this Zoom group. So yeah, maybe that's all I want to say at this point. Special thanks to Rebecca, my guest, for coming on. Really grateful to her. And she's been a guide for me. I've done a program with her. So it was, it was just an honor to do a kind of interview around the book and to explore the content in the book. And I think you'll find it interesting, and I hope you'll pick up the book down the road. So, that's it for me. Enjoy. Well, Rebecca, thanks for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really glad to dive in. Looking forward.
How long have you been working on this book?
Well, it's kind of my whole life in a way. If you look at the stories are from everywhere. I started writing a book over a decade ago called Wild Yoga, but that's not the book that ended up being finished. The finished book is Wild Yoga. I wrote another manuscript entitled Wild Yoga, and still that's not the manuscript we see. And in between, I wrote another book that wasn't Wild Yoga, and then ultimately came back to writing Wild Yoga. Those are all unpublished. This is my first published book, but all of those, seem like part of the journey of getting to this published book. But the last 2 years, I've been working on it pretty intently, like full time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well done. Well, congratulations. It's an endeavor, writing. It's an ordeal. So yeah, what a beautiful book that you're bringing forth in the world. And okay, so I had a feeling that I would just give you some of my opening impressions, and you can correct them if I'm off base here. But my first impression was like, oh, this isn't really a book about yoga, at least not how I think commonly that word is used. And what's your feeling about that? Is it a book about yoga? Why did you call it Wild Yoga? Or I can say more about what I mean.
Great point. In many ways, I had thought about not calling the book Wild Yoga, because it might take some people away or make them think the book is smaller, just about that than it is. But ultimately, I decided to call it Wild Yoga because that's what it is to me. And it kind of takes yoga back to the roots, or like in our mainstream dominant culture now, the main idea of yoga is synonymous with yoga asana. So when people hear the word yoga, they don't say asana, but what it means is this physical practice of postures. And the way I see the physical practice of postures is important, but it's just one branch on the tree of yoga, just only one branch. There's so many other branches, because a yoga is about who we are at the deepest level and finding ourselves. And yoga is about how we are in relationship to everything else and knowing the world so that we can be in relationship to it. So originally it was that larger body of study, and there were many branches. And even though my yoga is not the same as ancient yoga, the concept of there being many branches to the tree beyond just the body postures. That is, I'm restoring that ancient concept and
Hmm.
then invigorating it with what I've learned through various practices and spiritualities in my own life journey, what I've studied and what I've lived and my work with other people.
Yeah, and that's the way it feels upon my, I'm about halfway through because I just got the book. So, um, yeah, that's the feeling too, that it's exploring something ancient and expansive and interconnected, and not like a series of physical moves or exercises or something like that. Although I think you have something like 18 different postures, which isn't a ton anyway. But that's like almost it's not an addendum, but it's sort of like a PS at the end of each chapter. You actually have many other kinds of practices that people, I think, ordinarily wouldn't associate with yoga, but I can feel is just part of your expanded understanding here, and at the same time a more ancient understanding. That's what I'm hearing, at least. Uh, oh yeah, and I wanted to mention one more thing. So if it's not about yoga as how people ordinarily use that word, my impression so far is that it's a book about relationships and the cultivation of relationship, period, and the kind of art and craft of listening. Um, in fact, listening seems to be like the major, like, sort of bell, the chime in the background of the book. So does that land with you? Is that true, what I'm saying?
I love how you just described that. I commonly say it's a book about listening. Like the main practice of wild yoga is
Mm.
listening. Every chapter is about listening in some form.
Mm.
And I love how you said though that it's about relationships. I haven't heard that before. And I think that's absolutely true. And it's about relationships with aspects of the world and ourselves that a lot of times we don't acknowledge exist. So it's, a relationship with our body. Oh, I can have a relationship with my body. My body is a being in essence to listen to and commune with. Oh, nature, I can have a relationship with nature and a conversation and there's an exchange. Oh, my heart, if we go through every chapter, oh, my ferocity, I can have a relationship with my ferocity, or
Mm.
my fierceness, I can have a relationship with trees, or the capacity to love, or I can have a relationship to dreams and muse and the sacred and the spirit and my ancestors. So yes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
absolutely. I love how you said that. I call
Yeah.
it, I've called it a practice of stretching our consciousness, but
Yeah.
really it's stretching our consciousness so that we can be in relationship with all these others.
Yeah. It's like an opening of consciousness to the reality of a relationship or something like that. Um, or the sort of co-emergence of relationship that happens when we open up, and some, at least maybe that's one way of putting it. I I'll just give you a little bit of my background with yoga, which will take about 30 seconds. So yeah, I mean, I've tried like yoga a few times in the way most people try it, which is you go into a studio, you get out a mat. In my case, a white person with expensive yoga pants on puts on some Eastern sounding music and lights a few candles, and then there's a series of stretches, something like that. And I have to be honest, my first experience, I did like it. I was like, oh, I didn't know the body works like this. I didn't, and actually I didn't know it was so difficult. It's like it's taxing and requires a kind of focus and relaxation. It's like this tension between action and relaxing. But that was pretty much it, like the studio version of yoga, until on one of your programs at Animus was the first time I ever did yoga outside. And it was such an interesting experience for me because it wasn't very serious. That was my first feeling about it. It's like, oh, this is kind of playful. This isn't like where we need to talk in special spiritual voices and hushed tones, but it's like, oh, there's a kind of vibrancy and joy, and almost like I felt like a kid. That's maybe the first thing I wanted to say. I felt like a kid, like, oh, I can just roll around on the ground and put my belly on the ground, and and some of what I remember from this experience was just an invitation to be in relationship again with the actual land. And I can remember very vivid things about it. Like there were these little willow shoots that were kind of a little bit annoying, and there were some ants crawling on me because I didn't have a yoga mat, and there was a kind of awareness that I was in the presence of a mighty mountain. I mean, this was like at 9,000 feet in Colorado, so it's like, and I could feel the aliveness, I guess, in the in-between space between my own body and the actual land, like the place that I was. It wasn't abstracted out somewhere else, it was, so it was kind of shocking, and I loved it. And like each morning I wanted more of it. It's like, oh, I hope we do this kind of play again. So yeah, maybe you want to comment on that, or maybe talk a little bit about play and imagination as it plays into your understanding of wild yoga.
It's so great that you're interviewing me and you've actually experienced the physical practice that I've guided people through. That's uncommon experience. I often just refer people to my video online on my website if they want to see the practice, but the fact that you did it actually outside, and I love your comparison to yoga in a class versus the yoga outside, and that is, play and imagination are great words to bring into it. I often work with people like you on quests and different experiences. Sometimes they haven't come to do a yoga retreat necessarily, and people have sometimes aversion to the idea, like, what, that's yoga, that's not really something I'm interested in. But I might say, well, are you interested in your body? Are you interested in inhabiting it? And that's really what the practices are trying to do, is to take us into the physical, into our physical body in a way that maybe we haven't been before. Like maybe even if you're an athlete, that's a way of being embodied, right? You're used to running or doing your sport, or if you do a lot of outdoor activities and you're used to, being in your body that way. This is kind of dials it down to a little bit slower, a little bit simpler, taking us back to our younger self and just simple movements and experience, almost like feeling our body as a sacred being, like almost like imagining like we've just entered it again for the first time. And like, can I just, without all the preconceptions of what my body can or can't do or what it is, can I just enter it, and kind of like with a child mindset, present, centered, innocence and curiosity, and just explore how it moves and how I feel when it makes contact with the world. And there is a lot of imagination involved too when we're actually out in the wild nature, which is great because there's the physical experience is already happening. And particularly when we're not outside, I often call the outside in us to come out. But there's a lot of experiences, as you know, in the different chapters on my book. I would call them imagination practices related to the different themes of each chapter in our body. That imagination is key to everything, to knowing ourselves and having a relationship with the world, and certainly to stretching our consciousness and having a relationship with our bodies and all these other aspects of life that sometimes people don't even realize it's possible to have a relationship with.
Yeah. In fact, can you give us some practices like that might surprise people? Like here they are reading along and they're hearing a bit about your story, which we can come to in a minute. But what kinds of practices that might surprise people?
Well, sometimes for the body practices, for example, I say, lie down on your mat and just see how your body naturally wants to move. I mean, asana was first created to just try to give our creativity a jump start, right? To see what other yogis have done and to try out those poses and see how that feels. But ultimately, if we're in the flow of our yoga, it's a little bit dancey. It can be a little dancey, or it can be stillness. Sometimes I have a practice that's like, lie down and don't move until your body wants to, and then move the way it wants to. Some of us who've been really busy, we might lie down for quite a while before it wants to move, but that's okay. If you have the space, it's trying to find that like authentic desire to engage or move our body that's not forced or habitual.
Yeah. And I've done this very thing that you're describing. It's quite a different practice for someone like me. Like I like sports, like you were saying before, and I do all kinds of things and ski and bike and run, but they're all that have the same kind of forceful forward motion, we're going to suffer for an X amount of time. So just to lie down without expectation and wonder how the body wants to move is surprising. And for me, it creates like a little void, like, oh, which can feel a little frightening in a way, like, oh, what am I consenting to? What's opening here? And when the I don't know what it is about. I want to ask you something about masculine and feminine in a second, but I don't know what it is about this forward motion that I'm describing that I don't know. It pushes against that orientation when you're sort of letting go and allowing your body to lead the way, I guess, instead of the mind and what it's decided it's going to do outside or inside, for that matter. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the conversation I had too with when I had cancer, which was, I call that my introduction to wild yoga, where I was sort of woken up to all the ways that I would force my body. And I was excited about all those things. So it didn't really feel like I was forcing it, because I wanted to do those things, but it was still a like pushing my body to do things rather than listening. And when I was ill, I was forced to stop the doing, to be still more often and to listen. And that's where things began to happen.
Yeah. Maybe since you talked a bit about it in the book, I'd love to know a little bit more about cancer and where it was in your body and how that relates to what later becomes like a major sort of theme in your own awakening and practice that has to do with the heart. So, maybe tell us just a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I was in my senior year of college, and I was definitely like an achiever on different levels: editor of the newspaper, a resident assistant, a student leader on campus. And there was a way, I got ill right at the end of the first semester of my senior year. And ultimately it was a cough that wouldn't go away. And I didn't know, I didn't really know. I just thought, I went to the doctor and they said, well, you're probably it would get better when I rested, not completely go away, but get better. So my doctor had thought when I went home for Thanksgiving break that, oh, you were sick, but you're probably getting better. And then ultimately I went back to school, continued working, came back for Christmas break, and early January, I still had the cough. So I went back to the doctor, and he posited cancer as one possibility. And something in me like immediately knew that's probably what it was. And there was a CAT scan a couple of weeks later that confirmed that's what it was, in a section biopsy. And I stayed in school in my college for the last semester. Since I was such a high achiever, I could just lower my course load to 3 courses and still graduate. So I stopped all my other activities. And that was a really different experience for me, being somebody that was always so engaged and doing, to just have 3 classes and nothing else was it was like me sitting with myself more, and who am I? And also it really threw into the mix this possibility of death, which as a young 21-year-old, always pretty healthy person, I had never encountered, because I just always thought I could just push it quite some time. I never saw my death anywhere in the imminent future. And given the cancer, the odds were that they said there was a 1/3 chance that the chemo and radiation would work, meaning a 2/3 chance I could die, and an alternate procedure that increased your odds slightly, but that there was also a mortality rate with that. So it was, the odds were greater that I wasn't going to live than that I was. So I was made to sit with, what if these are your last days here on earth? And it just really reoriented my entire focus. I started to see things in the world that I didn't see before, like even little things like leaves and flowers and wind, and just details of things, and feeling the spirit or the soul of things. And there was a way too that I had always loved nature, so that wasn't really shocking. And I had always perceived nature as kind of like godlike, because that was the one thing where I felt the sacred. But when I was sick, something shifted inside me, and I could feel the sacred actually present inside me. I call this my first soul encounter, because it's there's something mysterious in me that is sacred, and I want to know it more. I don't know it, but I'm absolutely certain it's here. It's so
Mm,
palpable. And it wasn't imaginative, which I know is often a main window of soul. It was very kinesthetic,
mm,
but it was a sense almost like there was an inward, like a downward and inward dark, like there was this whole world of possibility within me
mm,
that I didn't quite know what it was, but it was like there.
mm,
And so it just opened that for me. And then nothing would ever be the same after that. It just reoriented what I considered important,
mm,
like grades or achievements were no longer nearly like important to me as they were before.
mhm,
And I'd always been seeking God. I was a philosophy, religious studies major.
mm.
So my journal before cancer is full of, do you exist, God? I was raised Catholic, but
Okay.
when I went to college, I became more, like, I don't really know.
Mhm,
And so I'm more of an experiencer rather than a believer. And so
mm,
I was always like, if you exist, show me. I mean, I constantly said that. So I almost feel like I called my cancer in
mm,
because it
mhm,
was an experience by which I felt clearly sure. I didn't quite know what the sacred was. I couldn't define it as inside or outside or what it is, but it is real because it's so palpable.
mm,
And that changed everything. So I became on a journey after I got well to try and stay connected to that and continue the conversation. But
mhm,
as you know, like I tried many different religions and different things, would go to services or spiritual retreats, and nothing really kind of like really did it for me. I mean, other than the wilderness. I was a wilderness guide in my 20s, and I worked for Outward Bound, and being in the wilderness is where I felt the sacred. But I could never, I was a nature mystic, but I could never quite feel the level of connection that I felt while I was ill.
mm.
And then when I started doing animist programs when I was 29, that's when like something just opened back up for me. And I felt like this conversation that had been on pause could finally continue.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. Um, yeah, and that was even right from the first chapter. You're talking about being in the wild and fasting, and um, maybe you want to say a bit about fasting, because I think anyone who picks up the book, which I hope they do, they'll bump into it right away. Like, oh, what's a vision fast, and what was going on there, and what's the purpose of such a thing, and is this another version of what you would call wild yoga?
Yeah, the fasting is one of the ways we listen. Like
Hmm.
you said, a wild yoga is all about ways to listen and deepen our relationship with nature. There's all sorts of levels. Just going out to nature without your iPod and your iPhone and trying to empty your mind of all your thoughts and agenda and just really being with the others and looking around and listening. That's like just a first level, like
Hmm.
absolutely way to begin. And we can have a conversation anytime without necessarily having to fast. But a fast is a really potent ceremony by which we're really making ourselves vulnerable to the natural world and to the mystery of all these others. Because not eating is weakening our ego. It's weakening our everyday way of operating. In a way, when we fast, we become a little closer to death. Our ego
Hmm.
isn't alive in the way it was before. It's not being nourished. And so something else is being nourished, something else that usually doesn't get seen or noticed, some other way, some other part of us that can receive and listen to the world and be less in motion, be quieter, be more attentive. We're altered. Plant medicines, which I know are big right now, plant medicine healing ceremonies.
Hmm.
Fasting is similar to that, to altering us like that. But those plant medicines, that which it can be great. They come on really fast and take people really far, usually for a very finite amount of time, and then they end.
Yeah.
It's quite intense. And fasting, happens over a few days, so it comes on a lot slower, the altered state, and then
Hmm.
it lasts a lot longer, so it can give you a chance to receive the things that are happening more fully. And I think also can be helpful in the reintegration process, which a big part of questing isn't just the quest itself, it's the visions that we receive while we're out there that give us direction for the rest of our lives.
Hmm.
So when we go slow enough, we can track what's happening, and deepen your conversation with the natural world, and even encounter your soul or sacred purpose, why you're here.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Um, yeah. Sometimes I like to think about fasting as, I mean, it's almost this is a way of just simply defining it, but this kind of self-emptying or subtraction rather than flooding, like with plant medicines, it floods the ego, and that's very interesting. But yeah, with fasting, it's like a weaning off. That's how it feels to me, a weaning off of our of our own egoic way of looking at the world and all of our attachments, and it puts pressure, and it's like kind of slow pressure, and it sort of builds over time. At least that's my sort of experience with it. Um, yeah, so I want to I don't want to jump all over the place, but I'm going to start anyway. I wanted to read you something. This
Okay.
is always dangerous when you read an author their own work. That's what happens to me when somebody reads me something I wrote. I think, wait, did I write that, or is that even true anymore? I don't know. But I want to read you something because I want to talk a little bit about the masculine and feminine stuff here. So here's a couple sentences. Most people suppress the feminine. Naming her seems necessary, so we remember how precious she is. Listening to the wisdom of our bodies and the earth is archetypally feminine, as are many of the practices of wild yoga. These practices are as necessary for men as they are for women. An essential aspect of the healthy masculine is reverence and respect for the feminine. Healthy cultures honor the feminine. And the practices of wild yoga are valuable for every human, whatever their sex or gender. The earth needs all of us to listen. Well, here's that word listen again. Yes, I want to ask you about that. So what do you mean by archetypally feminine? And do you think about most of the practices and invitations in this book largely in that sphere? Or is it, does it move around? Does it shift? Where does the masculine fit in? I just want to I mean, this is more just what I'm personally interested in. What do we mean by feminine? What do we mean by the sacred feminine or the sacred masculine? And how are they at play and dancing and something like that?
Oh, I love this question, and that you caught this thread that's woven throughout my book. It's not like a chapter title, but it's a thread, and it's really significant and important to me, so much so that I might even be interested in writing something further on it. It's hard to necessarily talk about. I think I mentioned the themes masculine and feminine have almost gone out of favor in our culture,
Yeah.
but I feel like bringing them in is important. And there has always been this balance, whether you call it yin yang or whatever words you use. There's always been these like opposing energies that somehow need to find balance. And so when I talk about the archetypal, I'm talking about those energies, and I'm also talking about how my perception is that in our world, the dominant culture part of our world, the masculine, the toxic masculine, which I think I name later as like violence towards women, seeking money, like aggression,
Mm.
defining yourself in those kinds of terms. But like there's a way that I think there's a healthy masculine and feminine energy both. I just want to say that
Hmm.
sometimes people don't think that. They think, oh, the masculine energy is the unhealthy and the feminine is the healthy. And that's not what I'm saying at all.
Right.
There is like a sacred masculine, sacred feminine energy in the world. And they want to be in a holy matrimony, like way of honoring each other relationship in us archetypally in the world. And there's also can be toxic masculine, toxic feminine presences as well, which I
Hmm.
think are quite common in our dominant culture. And there's certain qualities I allot to that. And whatever your sex or gender, a person can take on these qualities. And
Right. Right.
archetypally, we can see them in the universe, in the culture, by just the way that, we might see those different energies. So I do name qualities that I would put into each one. And I like to be a little bit loose or less structured with that, because I recognize that they have been named slightly differently by different people. So I'm not having a hard, this is it and nothing
Hmm.
else, but a sense. But to me, the healthy feminine qualities are very gestational. They're related to the womb energy, which is, there's darkness and mystery and birth, and things are birthed. They're just like, they sort of come together. Life comes together and is created through there. In the same way that, when we receive visions, like if we're on a quest and we're listening and we're gestating on the earth and we're listening, we're getting visions to birth our own selves or our life. If we're listening to our dreams, we might be getting visions also in that dark primordial space to listen and birth those visions through us in the world. So there's this real quality of nurturance, gestational listening, and most of the practices of wild yoga seem to me to have that sort of feminine quality. We just said listening, like not acting quickly, like, our actions come from this place of listening. And then I consider the sacred masculine an energy that's very protective and also active. Like it wants to take action on the visions. It wants to make them, it has a strength that wants to make them in the world. And so that's why this marriage between the capacity to listen and receive from these greater energies than just ourselves, and then the capacity to actually kind of have the strength and ferocity, like just put it out there and engage and protect life and honor life.
Yeah.
Those go together well. And there is some masculine energy, I would say, potentially energy that I would call feminine and masculine together energy, not just masculine by itself, but feral female ferocity. The feral female is feminine, but the ferocity itself to me reminds me of that masculine protection and action energy, kind of a warrior-esque kind of energy, a healthy warrior-esque energy. And then the Love Warriors for the Earth also has an energy too around caring and protecting the world and wanting to act on behalf in that way from all the visions that have come.
Yeah. That's quite touching and powerful what you're saying. And even the sort of juxtaposition of love and warrior together is an interesting dynamic. And I think like something I feel in reading this book and in engaging in practices like this is, we can't, if you just think about the masculine, to use your language, as a kind of protector at times, you can't protect really what you don't love, what you're not in love with. And, if you don't have a relationship with your own body and your own vulnerability and your own heart, much less the heart, vulnerability, and supple and nuanced earth body itself, you can't, this is probably one of the great challenges that we face as human beings on the earth right now. Just in terms of, we can't protect what we don't love, what we're not in love with. You can try to protect, but it doesn't come from that sort of deeply human and meaningful place, something like that. And what else do I want to ask you about? I wanted to ask you more about the feral, what'd you call it? The feral female ferocity, which is a chapter in here. Can you say just a little bit more about that? By the way, when I read that title and I started reading that chapter, I have 3 children, and all 3 of them were born at home. And that is an initiatory kind of experience, even for a man, for me. And I remember sort of being confronted with what I called the primal power. That was the language I had. I was like, what is this? What is this primal, fierce, loving, powerful, transpersonal energy that's at work here? It's like, it's in my wife and not in my wife, and in the child and not in the child. And it's like, talk about having a limited view of the world, or talk about thinking you're in control, or that what you're doing, just being in the room where birth is happening, and all those kind of illusions sort of dissolve. So it was just bringing me back to, just hearing the feral female ferocity. I was like, oh yeah, I think I've tasted a little bit of this. Anyway, so maybe you want to say what's in the chapter and take it from there.
Well, yeah, I love feeling into what your definition of it is, and I like that it isn't even a definition per se, but an experience, an
Mm,
embodied living experience and moment that you had in your life. It's beautiful
mm,
and mysterious.
totally, totally mysterious. Yeah. Um, yeah. So, I mean, what is the feral, uh, feminine ferocity, and how would anyone cultivate such a thing?
Well, first, I think it's an honoring of our feelings, even our like anger or fierce feelings. Sometimes when I work with people, especially I've noticed with women, but it could happen with anyone. There's a way we might judge our fierce or angry feelings, like, oh gosh, I shouldn't feel this way. I should be more peaceful. But honoring that the ferocity can be a communication from our bodies, from our hearts, just like love, just like any other feelings that we get. Uh, and it's also honoring that there's an aspect to protection. Sometimes protection too is also viewed as, well, that's a limited part. It's like the caveman brain, right?
Hmm.
Protecting. But there's actually an aspect to protecting that is so vital and actually missing in our world and missing in us.
Hmm.
And I consider ferocity, feral female ferocity, part of wholeness.
Hmm.
And even though I call it feral female ferocity, I mean to call it in for men and women. Like we
Hmm.
all can have feral female ferocity. And I like to just distinguish it in a way of calling it feral and female rather than just ferocity, because sometimes the toxic masculine anger is viewed as like that is ferocity. It's this sort of violent acting out or taking, raping women or taking
Hmm.
from the earth. And I want to honor that there is a way, that there is a kind of anger and violence that is really unhealthy in our world and still quite prevalent. But there is also a way that there's a healthy ferocity that seems to be missing or lacking from a lot of our culture a lot, and also just an honoring of that. And it's an energy that protects and doesn't acknowledge the structural hierarchy of our culture, which tries to put things into order, like some people can do whatever they want, commit crimes or be violent, and other people can, like other people, when they're violated, they just have to like quietly walk out of the room and not say anything because they're
Hmm.
like lower on the hierarchy. But a sense of that natural ability in all of us as animal bodies to protect ourselves and to protect what we love.
Hmm.
It's often actually indigenous people that protect land base. Most of the people who protect land base, who in the cultural hierarchy are often considered or put in a lower place, or in an economic stratosphere that are often considered,
Yeah.
and yet they're the most fierce protectors of the earth. So thank God for them. And what if we all, whatever our status or rank in the culture, just didn't buy into all of that, but honored ourselves? And it does start with honoring ourselves, because if we're being violated personally, then we're not going to be able to be much help
Hmm.
to the world or those around us. So it's being able to have personal protection and boundaries and honor them, and also to do that with who and what we love, which I include not only our family and friends, human, but our family and friends, the beings on the planet Earth.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Um, yeah, I was just reminded of, even our indigenous brothers and sisters here from this landmass. That's they like with the water. They call themselves water protectors, which is just a interesting way of just affirming what you're saying. There's a kind of fierce protection of the vitality of life that is embodied. Um, yeah. So I I want to ask you a little bit about grief, because there's also a thread of grief and sort of running through, especially in the opening chapters. And so, what is our relationship with grief, and what is it that grief is opening in us, and what's the invitation, something like that.
Well, grief happens also when we love, just like it's like all this is coming out of love. Ferocity comes out of love, grief comes out of love. When we love, we have a desire to care for and protect, and when we love, we lose. Sometimes we can't. Ultimately, everything we love will die,
Mm,
and sometimes unfairly or unjustly or too soon. And when we love and we open our hearts, then we open our hearts to grief. And if we let ourselves love the natural world fully, part of that is grief. I talk about earth grief,
mm,
and some of that might be feeling the feelings of the earth coming up through us. It might not be all us. And again, like ferocity, I just want to bring it back to sometimes also grief can be viewed as bad, like, oh gosh, I should just get over it and be over it and be fine. But
mhm,
no, actually no, like the older we get, the more people we love that we lose. So there's a part of us, our heart, which might always be broken for
mhm,
those we love and have lost, that
mhm,
always feel this that they're missing from, they're in us and they're missing too. And if we love the earth, then in these times it seems like that's to allow ourselves to feel the grief, which does open us up, I think, to possible messages and visions. There's a way that our grief can be like a portal too. It really alters us, just like fasting can.
mm,
The ego can't quite find its way in its normal operating if we've really given into grief. And there can be visions that come just from allowing us to go through this kind of emotional portal.
mhm. Yeah. On my very first Animus program, which was a wild mind program, I sort of stumbled into a kind of grief portal without looking for it. And it's so undid my life, like sort of just pulled the rug out from under my own concepts of what was important and meaningful and who I was. And what I said at the time, well, I remember my wife asked me, well, what happened? And I said, well, I did a lot of crying. And she said, well, about what? And I said, I don't know, really. I really did not know. It was like, it was personal and not personal. And maybe I would say part of what I was grieving was this kind of feeling of an unlived life. But I certainly didn't have words like that at the time. It was like, I don't know. And I was almost embarrassed in a way. And it kind of, it almost gave me some pause. Like, do I really want to continue? Do I really want to consent to more of this? Why not do some happy practices and where it's all light and, union and, but I don't know, but there was also something very tasty about it. It's like, to taste your own tears and to feel them falling on the ground and, um, to feel the way in which the earth itself seems to, um, breathe in our grief as we're crying out, and there's a kind of exchange, and it's like very potent. At least that's my feeling, even if we're not even sure what's happening, so, um and that's what I find so interesting about your book too, Wild Yoga. Like, what is it that you're inviting us into, and sort of subtly and not so subtly. And um maybe this would be a point for me to just ask, well, what's the scope of this book? Like, how do you frame it? Like, what's the sort of meta story that's kind of unfolding, just to give people a sense for it?
Hmm. Great questions. Yeah, thanks for sharing too about your own grief. And I think that makes sense. The idea of crying and not knowing, that's being in the portal and the mystery of our bodies and emotions, like just allowing ourselves to feel what we feel and trying to stay curious to discover as much as we can about it without being sure,
Mm,
necessarily. So the book is a book of practices. I don't call it a model per se. It's a book of practices in that I think it is nice to read the chapters in progression because they do build on one another.
mhm,
But you could also just read one of the chapters or skip to the chapters of certain practices that interested you most. And so I'm inviting people on practices, and also I'm suggesting that there can be a steep learning curve, and if people are dealing with a lot of trauma or emotions, you might want to stay in the first few chapters where there's a lot of resourcing and connecting activities, and before moving on to some of the more challenging chapters. It's kind of like challenge at your own risk. In other
Hmm.
words, it might not be everybody that wants to fall into their grief, or maybe they can only, touch into it for a minute or two. There's a great success with doing that if you've never done it before.
Hmm.
So that, there's a kind of an invitation, like I'm kind of saying these are the important places to go, and here's how to do it. And each person kind of has to decide, can I do that now? Do I need some more support to go there? Uh, and at the same time, it's not that I'm presenting a model necessarily, but it's more like a pathway where I'm saying, hey, we need to rewild ourselves, and here's how we can do it. Here's these 6 chapters in the beginning, all ways we can, become our more wild self, live into our true nature, and listen to the wild and dreams, our bodies, our hearts. And the second part of the book is kind of highlighting the spirit and the soul journey, probably with a greater emphasis on the soul journey, because that's more what I have some training in, but
Hmm.
with touching into aspects of the spirit journey, and even connecting with ancestors, and just naming that both are really valuable sources, and even ending with that play my part in the symphony, because my
Yeah.
idea is that when we're connected to soul and spirit, that we're playing our note, which is soul,
Mm.
and we're in the symphony, so we can hear the spirit of the whole world, and how my part plays in it.
Mm.
So it's a very sacred, transpersonal journey there in that second part.
Mhm.
And we continue staying accessed in those transpersonal energies and powers and relationships that we've encountered in the third part, but our focus shifts a bit, which I think it often does on the journey. Sometimes I could say in my own life, I was so hungry for soul and spirit in my early life, and probably most of my life, that I wasn't really thinking a lot about, well, what's give back to the world. I was just so in love with soul and
Mm.
mystery. I just wanted to be with it. And I wanted to honor it. And I wanted to do things that supported it, and to support bringing other people into honoring it. And I still love that. And yet there's been this other kind of focus that's come later in life for me. Some people, I think it comes earlier, but it's about giving back. Like, how does the spirit and the soul journey and all the personal work that I've done, and all these listening and these relationships that I've developed, how does it really bring us into this time on this planet, into this culture, and to these everyday human relationships? And how do we meet the challenges of our time and engage?
Mhm.
And I start still with love, because I really believe that's where everything starts, by the Wild Arrows chapter, and
Mm.
like with our bodies, loving the earth, and knowing what it is to like fully love, and what might be an addiction or pulling us away from real love, sucking our senses away.
Mhm.
And then go into practices that still involve listening, but like prayers in the dark, for the world, and
Mm.
radical dream work for the world, and love warriors for the world. But bringing it back to stretch our consciousness too, because to me, stretch our consciousness is really at the core of wild yoga. I mean, we're just, and by that, naming that chapter there, I'm just saying, we're not done stretching our consciousness. We've stretched it so far in this book in so
Mhm.
many ways. And where's the limit? There might not be one. There's still so much in the shadow, and so much we don't know. And how can we open collectively to the
Mhm.
idea of all the things that we can't see and don't know, as well
Mm.
as individually?
Yeah, all kinds of little threads I want to tug on here. But I think just because words like soul and spirit are used in a variety of ways, what do you mean? What do you mean about, um, what do you mean by soul? What do you mean by spirit? And what's the dynamic between these two realms?
Well, it's a complex topic, and I'm going to try
Mhm.
to answer it simply, just to give people a sense of it. And we can
Yeah.
we can get more complex as you might want, if you want. But to me, soul is there is a soul, a world soul, and a soul of the world. So there is something that can be all encompassing. But we have our soul, our individual souls, which are also connected to the world soul. And we are, but we, to have a soul encounter and understand who we are is the soul is more about our individual note or song, or what we might call mythopoetics. We
Mm,
might access it through the mythopoetic imagination, where we are opening to the visions or dreams of like the purpose of why did this being, why did I come here, and what is my wild mythic uh home,
mhm.
where do I inhabit, that through those relationships of, that are directly related to my being, what am I supposed to be and live and do in the world? Like what are the vehicles or relationships or places I'm going to connect up to try to bring this vision that I've got alive into the world about who I'm called to be while I'm here.
Yeah. And like as if you're a note in a symphony, like you're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah. And learning to sing that note and be that note, um and be shaped by that note, something like that. Yeah, okay. So I'm with you so far. I mean, we could I'll let that one go. But it's good to I think to attempt to say simply, although you that wasn't actually such a simple definition. There were several branches on the tree there. So, and what would you say about spirit?
Spirit is, to me, the totality. It's I love John Muir's statement. It comes to me, when we pick up any one thing in the world, it's hitched to everything else.
Mm,
And
mm,
so spirit really helps us feel our connection to everything. But it's even, and to me, spirit, the world, the earth is imbued with spirit. It's not, I don't see nature as just physical or just science. It's an alive spirit energy. But the spirit also can go beyond. One word that was used in Tibetan Buddhist meditation training I studied was the totality. And
mm,
that's sort of what I feel in the spirit,
mm,
is the totality. And it might even be emptiness or worlds or spaces I don't know, but it kind of encompasses the a power or energy that is all of it.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I like to use the word reality, but with a capital R. And that's sort of like saying the totality that is, it's not static, um, but is a kind of, uh, yeah, a kind of, well, now I'm thinking about emptiness and void and abyss and presence and everything that is, and perhaps everything that isn't. Yeah. In other words like God were pointers to such things, I think. Um, yeah. So, um, this is kind of I don't know if this is how relevant this is to your book, so I'm not sure what you might say about it. But another way I was wondering uh, about relationship and listening, which is how I first, which I think is right on. That's the call. That's the task. That's what your book is trying to invite us into, a kind of listening and a kind of relationship. Another word for that is prayer, I think. Um, do you do you view this way of being, this wild yoga way of being, as a kind of prayer, as a kind of living way of praying? And I don't, when I say prayer, I kind of mean it as a way of being, or even as a kind of posture in the world. Do you resonate with the word prayer?
Yeah, that's one of my soul names. That's, my soul name, Wild Love Prayer. So
Mm,
the fact that you see wild yoga as prayer, I'm just cheering, because I haven't heard that reflection before, but
mm,
I am cheering because, the challenges of living, we can get a soul vision or name or purpose, and sometimes it can always be wondering, gosh, am I doing it? Am I
mm,
living, what I'm here to live? And so when you reflect that back, it's like, yeah, that's absolutely.
mm,
That's at the core. My book and wild yoga are a prayer for the world, a prayer for each of us, and a
mm,
prayer for the world. And it's an invitation into a way of being and living and practicing that creates our life as an engaged prayer with
mhm.
ourselves and the world.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And this is, I mean, just to put some of my cards on the table, this is a word has been working me for a while. It's like something I resist, I think, because I grew up in a pretty Christian fundamentalist environment, and prayer was kind of like putting the right coins in the vending machine and getting answers from God or favors or whatever. And my resistance to that was pretty old. Like, I mean, going back to childhood, that just made me uncomfortable. I remember when I was a little kid, sort of praying to see if God would turn the lights off. Like, is this magic? Is that how it works? And being sort of disappointed that, oh, I guess I prayed earnestly, God didn't turn the lights off. So it must not be that. It must not be that kind of exchange. And so I guess I've had some resistance to it, but I think my own softening over the last few years, and my own, as the book invites people into, my own wanderings in nature-oriented practices have turned less into practices and more into prayers. That's what I'd say. More into T.S. Eliot has this like amazing and haunting line where he says, kneel where prayer has been valid. I'm like, oh, what? And I don't even know what he means by that. Kneel where prayer has been valid. But so it's not something we necessarily have to invent. My own ego is going to invent, but it's like a kind of consent to a sort of ancient way of alignment, maybe I would say, an ancient way of alignment. And I can feel that in the background of your own story here, your own realigning and a body and a 21-year-old body that was out of alignment in a way, and just a falling back into alignment, and you're sort of just inviting us back into that, it seems to me. Yeah, so let me, I want to actually look at my notes to see if I asked you anything I was planning on asking you. Yeah, I mean, maybe I want to leave it to you here as we sort of close this conversation. Is there some terrain that you feel like would be important for us to explore right now that might give people a taste? I could ask you about engaging in radical dreaming. This is near the end of the book, or even you could say some more things about love warrior for the earth, or there might be some other thread that you think, no, let's pull on that. What are you feeling in this moment?
Well, I love the questions that you've asked about prayer and the different pieces that you've pulled in that were new ways of thinking and seeing about the book. That's a wonderful thing. And I think sometimes, I guess one of the major pieces in yoga has been the place between prayer or spiritual life and action. They call it contemplation and action.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
often put
good.
together, and my book has, I think, brought those together, because that oftentimes there's a thought that if I'm in prayer, that I'm not in the world, that I have to be disengaged and separate in some way from, maybe even from my own body in some cases, or certainly from politics or the rest of the world. And I honor that truth. That's true. Sometimes there's places and moments in the journey where we do need to separate from the everyday world or our everyday sense of self, and perhaps be alone. That's kind of what a quest is, a solo. I don't like to call it a solo, actually, totally, because we're not totally alone. The natural world's all around us, but it's a
No
solo
kidding.
it's a solo from other humans, and you have a great community all around you to be in
The
conversation.
ego is on solo. Everything else is plugged in. Yeah.
That's great. I love that. Perfect. And so I honor that that's part of it, but part of prayer to me is, and I think it's been linked up sometimes with service, and I use the words creative service, but action. And that's a little bit what I think my book moves between, in that is some of those ideas of contemplation, or we might call it listening, and then acting on what we receive,
Yeah.
not being in a hurry to act, or come up with the answer when we don't know it, being able to hang out in steep in the unknowing. But when we do understand something, when we know, like, oh wow, yeah, this, then we also have the courage that it takes, and how it works us in many ways to take action on that. And in my whole book, I'm moving towards that. In the last chapters that you bring up, radical dreaming and love warriors for the earth, involve some level of action. Even radical dreaming might be especially good if you've already had a bit of a dreaming practice and you're
Mm.
used to listening to your dreams and engaging for your own calling and direction. But it's turning it towards the idea that we can dream for the world, that we can actually dream about our collective actions that we
Mm.
might want to take, as well as our individual actions, and that we can ask particular questions about the world because of our love and care for the world. Like
Mm.
what I like to ask about sometimes is, how can we protect species and ecosystems? It breaks my heart every day that they're
Mm.
dying. And one of the things that I broach in that chapter is, I mean, I think the environmental movement is failing
Mm.
if we measure the environmental movement by what's happening to the earth and the amount of lands and species being
Mm.
harmed. We're failing. And there's a lot of green movements that aren't necessarily um, that don't necessarily help the earth. Sometimes they're consumer movements, green consumer
Yeah,
movements,
no
like
kidding. Yeah, you
um,
can buy, you can consume your way into saving the world at this point.
right.
Yeah.
And somehow that's not accurate, because if we're consuming something, however great of a new product it is, whether it's a electric car or solar power or whatever it is, it's
Mm.
all of that took a level of consumption and mining and
Yeah.
labor. And so it's understanding that helping the earth is somehow coming up with ideas and plans that actually, to me, that actually stop the harm of species and lands, and potentially even restore ones that have been destroyed and bring them back, like has been done on the Elwha River, or different
Mm.
ecosystems that were once dammed or harmed, and now we know a way to bring life back.
Mm.
So if we look at that, and that's what we're shooting for, how can I dream, and ask the dream maker to give me visions? Like, I don't know how to make that happen. Like,
Mm.
how can I make that happen? I'm kind of overwhelmed. Like, what can one person do? Where should I focus?
Mm.
And dreaming and asking and for a step. And so
Mm.
that's where radical dreaming takes us. And you might have different questions than I do, but somehow it's about considering. Radical means like at the root,
Root,
big
yeah,
change,
rooted. Yeah.
at like big changes in the world. It's not
Mhm.
like minor little tweaks. It's actually
Yeah.
saying, no, like, culture needs a major overhaul. It needs to come down as it is and be recreated,
Mhm.
in something that is sustainable. Your humans need to create a way of life, some
Mm.
way of life that is true, that is truly in alignment with Earth's living systems. And
Yeah.
I don't know that we've come up with the total answer for that. There are some good ideas out there, but we also aren't acting on what we know, and that's where Love Warriors comes in.
Mm.
It's like there are some things there's a lot we don't understand, and let's stay steeped in the mystery,
Right.
sure, and keep asking for help. But also there are some things that are clear, like let's not cut down any more forests,
Mhm.
especially old growth forests. How about that? Like that, I mean, if we're trying to talk about climate change, like if we're cutting down an old growth forest, that's like the worst thing we can do for the climate, since that's
Mm.
actually giving us most of the value of what's healthy for the climate, as well as just what the ecosystem provides. So if
Mm.
there's some things that we understand, how do we get the ferocity around actually saying no, like
Mhm.
this can't go on? And how do we engage in a way where we stand up for those we love? And I like to, some people like, whoa, this is like super overwhelming. That's why it's the last chapter.
Mhm.
I recognize it takes a lot of energy to get there. And some people don't like the word saving even. And I've brought in a different piece, like as a cancer survivor, the odds were not in my favor
Mhm.
that I would live. And
Mm.
so my loved ones could have said, well, she's probably not going to make it. So why spend all this money on this chemotherapy and go through this thing when we're
Yeah.
ultimately just probably going to fail? Let's just roll her over and call it good.
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes it seems like people have that attitude with the earth. Well,
They
I think
do. Yeah.
we've already done enough damage, and we're already in a trajectory that's too late. So well, let's, we don't have to do anything.
Mhm.
And I take a bit of a different stance, and it's that, we don't know the future.
Mhm.
The science definitely doesn't look good, and it's worth looking at, but
Mhm.
we don't know the future. The future is a mystery. And anyway, our right relationship with the earth today isn't totally all about the outcome or the future. It's about today.
Yeah.
And part of right relationship is standing up for who and what we love and what we know is good, healthy for the world, and what we know isn't. And I kind of link human health and well-being with the earth's well-being. Like our own souls and our own physical health is going to always be compromised on some level, to me,
Mhm.
as well as the earth is not well
Mhm.
physically, is being hurt. So if we care about the individual, that ultimately means caring about the whole planet too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can hear in the background of what you're saying a kind of like, I guess this would be my way of putting it, and a sort of like eternal upwelling of spirit, or maybe you would use the word love or energy, that is essential for sustaining us in even facing these questions. I mean, I think that kind of like um, we can't do anything, or it's opposite, that we can save everything. I mean, both of those, like, they're not being fed. Both of those postures aren't being fed by the deep mysteries. And I think what's powerful about your book is that is sort of from the start to the end, you're inviting in these like transpersonal, deep, mysterious resources that are available to us as human beings. It's our birthright in a way. This kind of relational. We are the earth. I mean, we still have this kind of like um, natural world. Like I'm gonna go out to wild places as if that's something other than also our own bodies, which are their own unique wild places. But anyway, my main point was, yeah, I don't think we can engage in the biggest questions that we're facing as human beings without this kind of river, without this flow of resources and possibilities and mysteries and openings and gifts and darkness and challenge and all of it mixed in. We don't have to we're not lone we're not lone rangers out here. But yeah, maybe I'll just pause there. So yeah. Okay, I want to be respectful of your time, and I'm feeling like we covered some interesting and I hope life-giving terrain here. And I hope their listeners heard little seeds. They'll buy your book and start. And if or maybe start would be unfair. I'm sure everyone has already started in their own way. That's would might bump into a podcast like this. But maybe I'll start with practical things. How can people get your book? How can people be connected to the things that you're up to and the work that you're up to?
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, and well, my website, RebeccaWildbear.com, is a way to see what I'm up to, see what's going on, see about the book. And also you get my email and phone number and contact information if you want to reach out. So there's also some wild yoga programs coming up you'll see on my website. And I also work with Animas Valley Institute. I have a link connecting my website to Animas's website, but you could see programs that I'm offering there as well. So those would be some good ways.
Yeah, and buy the book. Is there a preferred way that you like to encourage people to buy the book, or not so much?
No, I always suggest local bookstores can be a good way to go. It's in a lot of local bookstores, or there's some different, I think on my website, I have some different ways different links. You can go to the publisher itself,
Mm-hmm.
New World Library or Barnes and Noble, or some indie publishers or Amazon. So I have just some different possible online ones. I do also say people could email me and write for me to sign a book and send it to them, but the shipping costs have gone way up, and
Yeah.
so it's quite expensive to do it that way. So you'd probably have to really want my signature in the book really bad to do that, rather than just order it online. And I'm happy with people to order books whatever way that is good for you, and happy for you to read it, and love to hear what you think.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. It was lovely talking with you.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you too. Thank you.